Calling the roll, Mr. Schramm,
Here?
Mr. Harrison,
Here.
Mr. Greenspan,
Here.
Mr. Germana. Mr. Germana is absent. Ms. Simon. We have a quorum.
Has there been any public comment related to the agenda?
No, Mr. Chair, and I'd like the record to reflect that Mr. Miller is in attendance.
Thank you. The minutes of the previous meeting of September 19th, has anybody had a chance to look at those? The chair will move that we adopt the minutes of the September 19th meeting. Is there a second? It's been moved and second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of approval of the minutes of September 19th, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none. Okay, the minutes are approved. If we can read into the record the ordinance that's before the committee.
Ordinance 2015-0017, amending Chapter 709 of the Cuyahoga County Code to establish a competitive review process for the award of casino revenue fund loans, enacting Section 207.05, creating the Casino Revenue Development Committee.
Okay. This was sent back by the president for any other input, and the chair at this point does not have any other input. Has there been anything to come forward to anybody in regards to it? Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Sure. I wasn't here at the last meeting, but I had several concerns. And the first of which is I'm not convinced that we need a special development committee at all. I believe that our council members are elected by our residents, the electorate, to make these decisions, and we have enough committees established that we don't need this committee. But secondly, even if there were a committee, I don't agree with the composition, that the executive is appointing 2 members, and the composition I don't agree with. And if we were to have a committee, I recommend it being something akin to how the Planning Commission divides up the county into different regions, and each region would have a representative. But 2 members from the executive. This is our council's money that we delegated in the budget to us to make decisions, not the executive. So these are my concerns, and I'm not going to agree to begin with even have a committee. I think our members of council are able to make decisions.
Well, I'll give, seeing how this started from the concept of having the chair having a competitive process and creating a committee. I'll give you my background as to why, Ms. Simon, I think it's appropriate to have a committee. My background, and hopefully that it will maybe influence your thought process. I believe that it would not be good and healthy for this council for individual members to be making decisions in regards to funds that would be coming into their district. I think it lends itself to the potential for people inappropriately making decisions. I think if you have a third party independent that's hands off, making recommendations as to how the funds would be used on an economic development basis from the standpoint of looking at the best projects, and let the best projects be decided upon based on the strength of an economic development committee consisting of 3 people, of which the council president would have had influence on directly in putting them on board. It would follow very much like Mr. Miller and I when we had the involvement in regards to the Clean Ohio Fund, in which case the money came in. It was a committee of a nonpartisan group that was put together. And then the workup documents were done by the Economic Development Committee within the state of Ohio, but using a scoring criteria that would have been created through a group like ours right here to make sure that the scoring criteria was then utilized, and ultimately the recommendations as to which of the programs are best would then result. The risk that we have if these individual economic development decisions are being made by individual council people is that it can go not necessarily with the best program, but the first program, not necessarily with programs that have, I don't know about looking at this, at our council as dedicated as we are. I don't believe anybody on this council has an economic development background, has not created a project like the one going on in Euclid, like the project going on in Van Aken. The size and the scope of those needs somebody that has the skills, the the expertise and the background to do that. If we are going to ask our task and task our members of the council to do this work, if you look back there, I don't know that they have years of experience on doing economic development programs of this nature, multi-million-dollar projects, and the result would be is that I think it would be influenced by politicking as opposed to projects. So that's my background in regards to it. Happy to hear anybody else's comments in regards to it. Yes, Mr. Miller.
Mr. Chairman and my colleagues, it's long been my belief that if you just count council members, there's 11 different opinions on how casino money should be spent, and I don't know that anybody will agree with what I'm going to have to say, but I'd like to share my thoughts on this. And my fundamental thing, looking at the history, is that in the last biennial budget, we decided to bifurcate the casino revenue money and have some of it go to the administration and some of it be run by the council. And my personal belief is that this is a temporary arrangement, and that it's not workable long term, and that long term we need to find a system where the casino money basically goes through the administration, but that certain guarantees or procedures are put in place to ensure that projects where the primary interest lies in the council rather than the administration can still get considered and funded. And so because I see this as a temporary arrangement, I would not be for setting up the kind of committee that we're talking about here, because I think it would have the impact of putting this bifurcation in concrete. Once this committee gets set up, it creates something that looks kind of permanent. And so now, the place where I agree with where the chairman is going is that I think the idea of having a scoring system and having rounds, I think that's a good idea. And what I'm thinking about is like that for the rest of this budget cycle, that we use either the Economic Development Committee or the Community Development Committee or the Economic Development Committee plus the Community Development Committee as the allocation source for the council's side of the money, and that what this committee would then do is to develop a list of scoring criteria that would include the usual things, the applicant's qualifications, the financing of the project, the economic development potential, and that they would develop 6 or 7 of these criteria, and we might have the administration score a good number of them, but we would reserve some that we might score, such as the question of does this project contribute or detract to a balanced allocation of the money by region, or what is the neighborhood economic development potential. Those might be things that we might reserve, and this would be analogous to the Clean Ohio program, where the staff and the administration scored most of it, but the Clean Ohio Committee had its own scoring, which created some points which in some circumstances could move the outcome a little bit. So that's kind of my concept, and I just throw that out there for everyone's consideration.
Yeah, the chair is not concerned with specifically what the look of a committee would look like as much as the desire to do exactly what you're talking about, Mr. Miller, and that you'd have criteria. Somebody needs to be able to analyze that criteria. I don't believe that this 11-member body is in a position to do analysis of loan paybacks of a $3 or $4 million project, what the weighting is between 2 or 3 competitive projects, which is the best one to do that. And unfortunately, what you end up doing is you get a discussion not necessarily based on the merits, but you get it based on the maybe the excitement of a particular project versus which one is actually in the best interest of the county. Out there. So what a committee would look like, I'm not hung up on this. This was a conversation that I had with the president of this, and I'm sure that if we wanted to have 3 members being appointed directly by the council, I'm sure that would not be a problem whatsoever, and 2 members coming from the executive. The reason to have somebody coming from the executive was a desire to have somebody like Mr. Carter in the back being able to bring forth ideas and concepts that would help on the economic development aspects of where and why a project scoring criteria should be written up and drafted. And so that was the purpose of having somebody from the executive side of the aisle. They're used to getting proposals in. They know what it takes to score. They know what it takes to look at credit references and backgrounds and payments and history of the organization, whether they be a community organization or a private organization. So they've got that already in their bailiwick, and so that was the reason to build upon that. I would have no problem whatsoever to amend this to include 3 members from council, so we would have the dominant position. And I don't think that the county, our council president would have any problem with it either. It was in the spirit of trying to find a way to bring conciliatory voice, but I can't speak for the council president, but I believe that he would accept that as a legitimate way to move this along. In which case, it would be a subset. And yes, it would have a little bit more permanency than having it come before the county economic development committee. But what it does is it brings in expertise that this committee doesn't necessarily have. The appointment might be to bring in a banker that the council president would put on there. As you were aware, Mr. Miller, when because you did serve on the Clean Ohio Council, we did have expertise from other folks outside of just the legislative branch in bringing forth ideas and thoughts.
We certainly did, yes.
Yeah.
And Mr. Chairman, one other comment that I didn't mention is that I strongly agree with what you said about single council members should not be making funding decisions. Not only should they not, there is explicit language in the charter that says that no county money may be allocated by a single council member. So I totally agree with you on that.
Ms. Simon, other comments?
Well, first of all, it's impossible for any one council member to make a decision, so I don't know where that comes from. We vote, and there's a majority or a supermajority that allows us to have legislation enacted. There's no one council member who can determine the outcome of any piece of legislation, first of all. So the comment, it doesn't make sense in the context of a legislative body, with all due respect. In terms of being inappropriate for council members to be voting on things we were elected to do, I don't see how this is any different from us voting on the Western Reserve Fund. We sat here as a committee. I served on economic development. I was very involved in coming up with their criteria, adding to Department of Development's list of scoring options. We were able to make decisions for Western Reserve money as a council body. There is no difference here, except that which is we have the ability now to bring forth a project. That's the only difference. So now we need a committee built because council can't make decisions for proposed projects that come from council versus proposed projects coming from the administration. There's no difference. The only difference is that we're making the proposal. So it can be consistent without having some committee coming in and superimposing on us their position, when we can have the Department of Development give us their opinion, go through the due diligence, we could come up with the scoring criteria ourselves, and we can abide by some objective means to be voting. It's not one person making decisions, and I don't know where partisanship comes in this conversation at all, when we all along have been voting on projects as a unit.
No, my reference to partisanship was down at Clean Ohio Fund.
Okay.
It was not here in this
Okay,
fund.
I appreciate that. But we've been doing this, and we're able to do this, and to just totally abdicate this to some arbitrary committee it's not right, and it's inconsistent to what we've been doing all along with Western Reserve. I agree with you. We need some objective way to evaluate a project. You know, you keep saying the first one that comes in, are we going to vote on it? No, I think we're all pretty well-informed council people, and we listen to the administration, and I think there's a way to write this, that we do have to have an objective way to score as a body. But we're all individuals, and we have a right to vote on our council money that we allocated to council to make these decisions. This is what we did, and we're capable of doing it. I don't think we need a committee, but I do think we need and welcome Department of Development's expertise in coming in and evaluating projects from a financing standpoint, from how we do things with other projects. So I would welcome that, but to have a committee, it just adds another layer of government that we don't need.
It's, I guess, where I would find a difference on, as far as adding another layer, when we created the Western Reserve Fund as a group at the recommendation of the council or the county executive, we did participate, and we actually came in and said, no, we will participate in the rules and the writing and the documentation. So we participated. They took the initial draft, came before us, and then we made augmentation to that, sent it back, and eventually we have a finalized form that now exists. I would see those rules being exactly the same, being done, being drafted, being brought forth. The difference is that currently, when a project of the King Nut, for example, came before us a couple weeks ago, it came from the executive and it came forward to us, and we then still did not lose the voting aspects of it. The difference on what I'm suggesting here in King Nut, the reality of it is that the county executive did have to decide, of the $10 million they had available, how is this going to be part of where they're going to allocate that $10 million? And they made the decision that they're going to allocate that. What I am suggesting here, by having a committee, and the committee can be three members from council appointment and 2 from county executive, and my background, because I wanted to have some expertise similar to what took place down in the Clean Ohio, was that when it came to us, just like the King Nut came to us, that it would come to us and we would then vote it based on that criteria that came to us, similar to the individual program. But the difference here is that we have, we're not seeing all the projects coming in. If we could create this committee that I'm talking about, all those would come in at a certain prescribed time. So they would have to come in, very similar to what had to be done for Clean Ohio, that projects of this nature, they would have either quarterly or semi-annual applications, and then they would all come before that, and the best 2 or 3, because there's not going to be enough money. We know that. That's for sure. We only have $2.5 million in the fund currently. And as Mr. Miller points out, if it ever gets unified, it perhaps could have $6 or $7 million. If it ever gets unified to where my belief would be that when we go out ultimately and get bonding funds to go out and actually have a bigger impact, this would act and operate very similar to the Clean Ohio Fund, in which the best projects come forward, not all get funded because there's only so much money going to be available, and some fell off the table. I mean, by example, the Euclid project, it got approved, but it did not compete against the Van Aken project. If there was only enough money to do one of those 2 projects, where was the analysis being done for financial payback, for best interest of the community? Nobody was doing that, and I don't think this body, that's just not what we do. We rely on somebody else to have done that work.
Right. we would rely on the Department of Development, who's doing it now for their projects. And if the issue is timing about what projects are in the hopper, we would have the same timing issue. Every 6 months or every year is when applications are due. This body would get the applications and submit some due diligence recommendation from the administrative department, and then the council can make decisions. Is it going to get sticky perhaps when we want to represent our district? Well, sure, that's our job as a representative, but there's 11 of us to be able to come up with decisions based upon due diligence. But we don't need a committee as a layer to do this. If the question, you said the difference is timing. So we would ask for all the applications to come in at the same time and have Department of Development do what they do otherwise. So it's no difference, except instead of one executive with a team, we have 11 of us being able to rely on that department. But then when you add a layer, then you have 11 of us plus a layer, and then it comes back to us anyways, and then you have the Department of Development. Why do we have the layer? It just,
Because I believe that the 5 people that would be selected would be people who bring in expertise in areas that this body does not individually. Yes, we have obviously the obligation, but this body, I don't know how many have gone out and gotten a $45-50 million funding to do what was done at Euclid, or the couple $100 million. So somebody at that level would be doing that analysis, that would be bringing in that expertise. I would hope would be those 5 names that would be nominated.
well, isn't the Department of Development doing that now, Mr. Chair?
The Department of Development does that, but they are not in this particular, our monies would be something that we would, obviously, we would be appointing the members to this committee, so we would have more of an impact on those decisions.
I think we could rely on Department of Development because we do it every place else. Why would it be different for this money? And if we wanted to bring in experts, we have the ability as a council to retain a consultant if we had particular questions every year, which, I'm more inclined to look at whatever, specific questions we have. But to have this body, this layer giving us advice when we vote on it anyways, we don't need a standing committee to do this, I guess is my position. So I understand what you're saying.
Yeah,
And again, it's not, we don't have a gazillion dollars anyways. It's this limited amount of money, as you
We don't
keep
have a gazillion
saying.
dollars, yeah.
So to have a standing committee to deal with, the limited revenue we have coming in, I just don't think is necessary. But that's just my position, and I understand and appreciate what you're saying. But in the middle, we do need some criteria. I agree totally. It can't be just, emotional voting. Although, if we want to, we can as an individual. But there's 11 of us that I think we counterbalance each other really well. So let's have an objective way to score. Let's rely on Department of Development, but I'm not in favor of these appointments, and we don't need a standing committee.
Greenspan?
It just sounds like there's more work that needs to be done outside of this committee meeting to move this through to today. 2 things that I see is if this is really a council-driven initiative on item F in section 2, then council staff should clerk the committee meetings, my thought. And number 2, the other item I had is, as in the CDSG, which we're pulling from the same pot of money, that project sunsetted. I don't see the same sunset language in here. So I don't know if that means that dealing with that specific amount of money, if one sunsets, then all the money defaults to this, or what. But I think if we're looking, I think these 2 should be consistent. These 2 programs, since we're sharing the same pool of money, should be consistent in its sunsetting provision, unless I'm missing it. I don't see the sunset provision that's in the CDSG legislation. So those were my 2 comments, but I'm not sure we're going to get this resolved today. I think it's good that these points, Ms. Simons and Mr. Miller's points and Mr. Schron's are being brought out, but
Yeah, this did not have a sunset in it because someplace the money has to reside. And so what does sunset is the money going into the budget, to the county executive, that does sunset. And in theory, that will roll back into the casino revenue fund unless decided by a future body in a future budget. So that money will come back into this. And so that those funds.
oh, so what you're saying is the entire casino money, $7.5–8 million, whatever it is.
At least it'll be a place for it to sit. It doesn't, obviously doesn't go forward if amendments have been taken to extend either one of your original legislation or the budget.
Right, so if I
At this
understand it,
point in
then-
time, there's no place for those monies to go other than back to the casino revenue fund, at least my understanding of the way the budgets are done.
Correct. So, right, so the way the budget's done is it identifies the casino revenue fund as being appropriated into two buckets right now, both of which, two uses of the casino money, both of which sunset at the end of 17. But this then would be the surviving entity or surviving program, which would mean that if not addressed in the budget, then the full $7.5 to $8 million would go to this activity. Is that right?
That's my understanding of the way the original budget was done in the first place. Is that correct? You were the budget director, I think, at the time.
Yeah.
So it was
No, the
my
mon-
impression that rolls back into this, no matter what happens.
It would go into the casino revenue fund
Yes.
for a purpose to be determined later. This looks like it says, okay, it goes back to the casino revenue fund and it goes to this program.
This was an attempt to at least have a source of doing something with the funds, right?
Okay, all right. Okay, so like I said, I think if it's a council-driven initiative, F should be changed to council's clerking. And then I do think, just to be consistent, that that this should sunset with the other legislation. But like I said, I think there's so many different opinions right now. I'm not sure we're going to move it out.
No, it's not going to move. At this point in time, we don't have a full committee, and so as a result,
Okay,
it would be my assumption that it's not going to move out today.
all right.
Any other comments in regards to the concept of?
No, I mean, I somewhat agree, nothing against the administration, but, similar to what we did with CDSG, they're kind of the experts in evaluating programs and applications. That's why I chose that path as the path for evaluation.
And that's actually what happens in the Clean Ohio Fund, the Economic Development Committee of the governor's office, both Governor Strickland and Governor Kasich, before that, put together how the points and the scoring criteria was going to be used. It then got scored, and the documents then came to an independent third body to review them for which ones are going to get funded, and then it went to the legislature, similar to what I'm talking about here. So yes, it is a layer between there, but the scoring is coming to an independent third party, so that, yes, there's 11 of us here, but I can guarantee you that there's going to be some pulling in of points of view that would, I believe, would be better served by having an independent body saying, yes, this is the better of these three programs. Because I think it provides expertise that this body doesn't have. I don't know how many people have been involved with construction projects or anything of that nature, whether they be for private or public sector out there, and so you can bring that expertise on. Mr. Harrison?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Heard many sides, and from my point, I think I'm very confident in the Department of Development and the work that they do, being able to vet these projects, assess them, and bring us information that we deem is needed to help us make a decision. We've done that time after time, and I think we've done a great job. For the short time I've been on council, I have not seen anything that will lead me to believe otherwise. So I'm fine with such as what my colleague, Mr. Greenspan, said, and why we chose to go that particular route and development to assess those projects, that we continue that as relates to this, and that both measures be consistent with each other. So I'm inclined not to have this extra layer of red tape, but to simply work through our trusted Department of Development and have confidence in my colleagues that we make sound decisions when supporting particular projects. Thank you.
It strikes me as though if we defer almost the entire recommendation directly from Economic Development Department, that's tantamount to them making the recommendation as far as what goes forward. The problem with that is that with the shortage of funds, it's going to be the first project that's going to come forward more than likely in the course of the year, as opposed to a competitive process that selects the best when, if you have a cutoff date, at such and such a date out there.
We can have it.
Pardon?
We can have it.
We can have a cutoff date.
Right. Nothing says we can't.
Nothing says we can't, from that standpoint. Seeing that we're, obviously, at this point in time, we don't have a full committee, is there anything else in regards to this matter? We'll keep it in committee, for discussion. Okay, and perhaps it belongs, with the committee of the whole and ultimately on something of that nature too. I will discuss that with the, and I know that we have Mr. Carter there in the back of the room. Any comments one way or the other? And I don't want to put you on the spot, and if you say, no, I won't, that's understandable too. Thank you. I guess that's an, I got a sir there. I'm not in uniform, so we'll take a pass on that. All right. Is there anything else to come before, is there any miscellaneous business? The chair will retain this item before it? Any miscellaneous business or any other public comment, not unrelated?
No, Mr.
related?
Chair.
Hearing none? Chair adjourns the meeting. Thanks.